My name is Emily Carter. I'm 35 years old, and until recently, I believed that marriage was a sacred bond where respect came before any bloodline. I used to be the type of woman who tolerated everything just to keep the peace. I tolerated my husband's silence, my mother-in-law's interference, and even the sideways glances from my sisters-in-law during Sunday lunches. But everyone has their limit, a point where self-respect rises and screams louder than any family tradition. Nathan and I bought our house right after we got married. It was our first big step together. I remember the day we signed the papers at the registry office. My hands were shaking, and his eyes sparkled like a kid opening a Christmas gift. The down payment came from an inheritance I received from my father, and the rest we paid together with a lot of effort. I worked 2 jobs for 3 straight years. I barely saw the sun. Nathan, as an insurance agent, contributed what he could. The house was simple, but it had soul. Every detail was chosen by me. Every painting, every pillow. I made that place a home. But my mother-in-law, Judith, never accepted that. To her, I was just the woman who snatched her son away. She had a passive-aggressive way of showing her disapproval. She made a point of highlighting, on every possible occasion, that Nathan had grown up in that neighborhood, that the house resembled the one his father had left, and that certain parts of the architecture looked like the Carter family style. Once she even said, "It's almost like this house wants to return to the rightful lineage." I laughed at the time, thinking it was just another one of her odd remarks, but I was so wrong. The morning everything started to unravel, I was in the kitchen making breakfast. The smell of warm bread mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee. It was just an ordinary morning, until the doorbell rang repeatedly. When I opened the door, there she was, made up like she was going to a gala, with a triumphant look in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine. Behind her were 2 large suitcases and her friend Cheryl, the town's infamous gossip, known for knowing everyone's business before they even knew it themselves. "Emily, sweetheart," she said in that syrupy voice. "I'm moving in. The house belongs to the family, remember? It's time it came back to where it truly belongs." At first, I thought it was a joke. I laughed nervously, but her expression stayed serious. That's when I realized that somehow she genuinely believed what she was saying. Judith entered the house like she owned it, walking past me with her nose in the air, inspecting the living room like a real estate agent, and tossing her purse onto the velvet couch I had saved up to buy. "Don't worry, Emily," she continued, removing her coat. "You can take your time moving out. I know it's not easy to leave a place like this. Nathan will understand. This house has always been part of the Carter legacy. What belongs to the family always finds its way back." My hands were trembling. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. I called Nathan, hoping he'd deny this insanity, but he answered groggily, like someone avoiding conflict. "Emily, Mom's going through a tough time. Maybe she just needs to stay there for a few days. We'll talk about it later, okay?" "Later? What do you mean later? A woman storms into my house, claims it's hers, and Nathan just wants to talk about it later." That was the moment something inside me snapped. I had spent too much time staying quiet, being understanding. But this had gone too far. Judith was so confident, so self-assured, like she held some kind of trump card. And the worst part? The entire town seemed to be siding with her. The next day, I overheard Cheryl whispering at the bakery with another neighbor. "Did you hear Judith moved back into the family house? Poor thing. She's been through so much. Thank goodness. She's back home. That girl never really belonged there anyway." I heard every word, and as I stood there, holding warm bread in my hands, something inside me boiled. They didn't know about one tiny thing. One small, but very important detail that would change everything, and I was ready to share it, but on my terms. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support our work. That way, we can keep bringing you touching and emotional stories like this one that reach the heart and make you reflect. Thank you so much for being here with us. The moment I stepped back into my house, with the gossip from the bakery still ringing in my ears, I realized something. Judith didn't just want to stay here for a few days. She wanted to erase me. She wanted to rewrite history, pretend that everything Nathan and I had built didn't matter. And worst of all, she truly believed she had the right. I walked into the living room to find her sprawled across my couch, watching one of those real estate reality shows as if she were doing market research for her new property. My favorite mug was in her hand, the one my best friend gave me when I got promoted. And Cheryl? She was setting up snacks in my kitchen like it was some sort of girls' night in. "We're thinking of repainting this room," Judith said, not even looking at me. "Something warmer, more traditional. These grays are so impersonal." I couldn't even respond. I just walked past them and went into the backyard to breathe. I needed air. I needed a plan. That night, I barely slept. Nathan didn't come home. He texted some weak excuse about working late and crashing at a hotel to give his mom space. What he really meant was that he didn't have the spine to face me. Or worse, he agreed with her. I sat alone in bed, running through everything in my head. The deed, the down payment, the renovations, the paperwork, all of it. I had every document, stored safely. And yet, everyone in this town seemed to think that if Judith said the house was hers, then that was that. They were all too caught up in her last name, in her late husband's status, in the family's legacy. But legacies don't pay mortgages. I did. The next morning, I went to the attic. It was time. I pulled out a dusty box labeled closing docs. Inside was every shred of proof anyone could ever need. The property deed with my name on it, the bank transfers from my account, the contractor receipts from the renovations, signed and dated. Nathan's name wasn't even on the deed. We had agreed to that back then because my father's inheritance covered the majority of the purchase, and Nathan hadn't objected. If anything, he seemed relieved. I was the one who had taken the risk. I was the one who had signed the line. Judith had no idea. She strutted around the house like a queen reclaiming her throne, but she was sitting on my crown. Later that day, I calmly called a family meeting. I invited Nathan, Judith, and Cheryl. Yes, even Cheryl. I wanted her there. I needed a witness. I knew if Judith ever backed down, it would only be because the whole town saw the truth. They gathered in the living room, all smug smiles and fake kindness. Nathan looked uncomfortable but didn't say a word. Typical. I stood before them, holding the documents in a neat folder. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "Before we discuss any more decorations or moving plans," I began, "I think it's time we go over a few facts." Judith rolled her eyes. "Emily, don't be dramatic. We all know this house." I raised my hand, silencing her. I pulled out the first page and held it up. "This," I said, "is the deed to the house. Purchased on June 17th, 8 years ago, under the name Emily Carter. Only Emily Carter." Cheryl gasped. Judith's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "I'm talking about legal ownership. This house isn't part of any inheritance. It wasn't passed down through the Carter family. It was bought, paid for, maintained, and it's mine." I handed the folder to Cheryl, who opened it with shaky hands, eyes widening as she flipped through each page. "But Nathan," Judith tried to argue. "Nathan never wanted his name on the papers," I said, turning to him. "Isn't that right?" He nodded, barely meeting my eyes. There it was. his silent confirmation. The silence that followed was delicious. For the first time, Judith had no clever comeback, no snide remark. She looked around the room like the walls were closing in on her. Cheryl let out a stunned laugh. "Well," she muttered, "that's certainly not what I expected." Judith stood up, her face red as a tomato. "You tricked him. You manipulated this family." I looked her straight in the eyes. "No, Judith. I protected myself, because I knew this day would come." She grabbed her purse, humiliated. But before she could leave, I gave her one last reminder. "The next time you barge into someone's home claiming ownership, make sure your name is actually on the deed." After Judith stormed out of the living room with her purse swinging like a sword, I stood in silence for a few seconds, letting the moment settle into the walls of the house. Cheryl, clearly stunned, still held the folder in her hands, flipping through the documents like a judge reviewing the final evidence of a courtroom drama. Nathan didn't move. He just sat there, eyes on the floor, shoulders hunched, as if my truth had crushed some illusion he had been clinging to. I thought I would feel victorious in that moment, but the truth is, I felt tired. Not defeated, not broken. Just tired of fighting battles that shouldn't even exist in a marriage. Tired of proving my worth in a house I built with my own hands. Tired of the silence that always followed when I needed my husband to stand up for me. That silence now echoed louder than Judith's accusations ever could. Cheryl finally stood up and awkwardly handed me back the folder. "Emily, I had no idea," she said, her voice unusually soft. "Everyone in town thought this place would, part of the Carter legacy." I smiled politely, but there was bitterness beneath it. Because that's the story Judith wanted people to believe, and no one ever thought to ask me. She nodded slowly, and for the first time, I saw something close to shame in her eyes. Not for gossiping, no. Cheryl loved that too much. But for realizing she had been used as a pawn in someone else's fantasy. That night, Nathan came home. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, though it was already clean, when he walked in, not with guilt but with confusion, as if he still hadn't decided whose side to be on. "She just needed a place to go," he began, like a broken record. "You didn't have to humiliate her like that." I turned to face him, the cloth still in my hand. "I didn't humiliate her. She humiliated herself, walking into my house, claiming it was hers. You stood there and said nothing, Nathan. Nothing." He looked away, and that silence returned, cold and familiar. "She's my mother," he said at last, "and I'm your wife." My voice was calm. "But I guess that never really meant anything to you." The truth hit harder than either of us expected. He flinched, like the weight of it finally settled in his chest. But I didn't cry. Not this time. I had cried enough in the past for both of us. We slept in the same house that night, but not in the same bed. In the days that followed, something changed. The phone calls from his mother stopped. Cheryl, for once, had nothing to whisper about. Maybe because the truth was far less exciting than the fiction Judith had created. Or maybe it was just more uncomfortable to admit she had been wrong. Still, the story spread. In a town where everyone knew everyone, it was impossible to keep anything quiet. And the version they chose to run with, that Judith tried to reclaim the Carter family estate, but got blindsided by a shocking truth. Her own son wasn't even listed on the deed. Some called it poetic justice. But for me, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming more than just a house. I had spent years adjusting myself to fit into someone else's family mold, wearing their traditions, nodding through their expectations, shrinking so others could shine. And in the process, I had nearly disappeared. Judith eventually moved back to her apartment across town. Word has it she barely leaves the house now, and when she does, she avoids the bakery. I guess the taste of humility isn't nearly as sweet as gossip. As for Nathan, he tried. For a while, tried to talk more, tried to listen. But I had already reached a point where words no longer held weight. Trust isn't something you rebuild with a conversation. It's something you preserve with action, and he had let mine rot for years. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, he came home early and found me repainting the living room. He stood in the doorway, watching me roll a soft shade of sage across the wall. "Looks good," he said quietly. I didn't turn around, just kept painting. "Thanks," I replied. He hesitated. "Are we okay?" That question. So simple, and yet so full of years we'd both ignored. I finally turned to face him, paint on my hands, a drop on my cheek. "I think we're finally honest," I said. He didn't reply. Sometimes the silence says everything. I wish I could say things got better after that conversation. That Nathan and I rebuilt something strong from the ruins of what Judith left behind. But the truth is, when a house shakes from the foundation, sometimes it's not enough to patch up the cracks. You have to ask whether it was ever built to last at all. I started noticing things I had overlooked for years. The way Nathan avoided conflict, not because he was peaceful, but because he was passive. The way I carried our life on my back, finances, plans, dreams, while he stood by, pretending presence was the same as participation. And then came the moment that truly opened my eyes. It was a Saturday morning. I was sorting through paperwork for taxes, sipping coffee at the dining table, when I found an old card tucked into a folder labeled Home Warranty. It was a handwritten note from Nathan, dated the week we moved in. It read, "Emily, thank you for making this house our home. I know I couldn't have done this without you. This place is yours in every way. Your heart is in every wall." At the time, that note had made me feel cherished. Now, reading it again, it felt like a confession. He had always known this was mine. And yet, when it mattered, he chose silence. He let his mother walk through our door and try to erase me, knowing she had no ground to stand on. I set the card down and looked around the house. Not as a victim, not as someone clinging to a broken marriage, but as a woman who had outgrown a version of herself. That afternoon, I went to the garage and pulled out 2 suitcases. I wasn't packing to leave. I was packing for him. When Nathan got home, I was waiting in the living room, the same room Judith had tried to claim as her own. The bags sat by the door. His eyes dropped to them immediately, and he frowned. "What's this?" I took a breath, calm and clear. "It's time for you to go, Nathan." He blinked, like he didn't understand the language I was speaking. "Emily, come on. We've been through a rough patch, but we can work on it." "No, Nathan," I said gently. "You've been watching me do the work for 8 years. I bought this house. I protected it. I protected us. And when I needed you to stand beside me, you stood behind your mother. That's not a rough patch. That's a pattern." He sat down, rubbing his hands together. "Where am I supposed to go?" The question hit me like a cold gust of wind. Not because I felt pity, but because it said everything about him. I had asked that same question 100 times in my head when Judith tried to push me out, but I had never voiced it. I had stood tall, found answers, took back my power. He, on the other hand, seemed completely unprepared for consequences. "You'll figure it out," I said. "You're an adult, Nathan. It's time you stop hiding behind women and start standing on your own." I expected more resistance, more begging. But maybe deep down he knew. Maybe he'd always known I was the one holding the weight of our lives. And now that I had put it down, he had nothing left to lean on. He left that evening, quietly. No final speech, no dramatic exit. Just the soft thud of a door closing behind a man who finally realized the door was never truly his to begin with, and, just like that, the house became lighter. The next morning, I woke up with sunlight pouring through the windows. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and listened to the wind in the trees. There was no tension, no footsteps pacing upstairs, no sighs from across the hallway, just me. It was strange at first, how silence could feel so full. That same week, Cheryl showed up at my door, not with gossip, but with something unexpected. A small potted plant and a letter. She handed it to me with a sheepish look. "I was wrong," she said, "about everything. You deserve to be here. I thought you'd like this." The plant was lavender, my favorite, and the letter was short, but sincere. It didn't undo the past, but it was a start, a rare moment of humility in a town that thrived on assumption. I placed the lavender on the windowsill in the kitchen, right in the spot where Judith once stood, claiming everything around her. Now, all that remained of her presence was the memory, and a reminder that I would never again let anyone walk into my life and declare ownership over something they never built. Because sometimes it takes someone trying to erase your name for you to finally write it in bold letters across your own story, and I wasn't done writing, not even close. Life without Nathan took some adjusting. At first, the quiet was disorienting. I'd wake up expecting to hear the shower running or the clinking of his coffee cup in the sink. But those sounds were replaced by new ones, my playlist echoing. Softly through the house, the hum of the sewing machine I hadn't used in years, and most importantly, the steady beat of peace. I began rediscovering myself in small ways. I painted the guest room that Judith once claimed would be hers. I turned it into a reading space filled with sunlight, cushions, and the scent of cinnamon candles. The upstairs closet, where she had once stored her boxes, became a home office where I finally launched the small online business I had been dreaming about for years. People in town started treating me differently, some with more respect, others with careful distance, unsure how to face the woman who had stood up to the queen bee herself. But I didn't need their approval anymore. That was the real shift. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for validation from anyone. Not Nathan, not Judith, not the neighbors, just me. One afternoon, as I was reorganizing old files in the attic, I came across a folder I had completely forgotten about. Inside was a letter, addressed to me, from my father. It had been tucked into the envelope with the documents from the inheritance he left behind. "Emily," it read, "this gift isn't just money. It's freedom. Use it to build a life you're proud of. And never let anyone convince you that you owe them a place in that life just because of their name. You decide who gets to stay. You decide what your home looks like." I sat on the attic floor, that letter trembling in my hands, and cried. Not out of sadness, but from the quiet confirmation that I had done exactly what he wanted me to do. I had protected the life I built, the home I built. And now, finally, the woman I was building too. A few months passed before I saw Nathan again. It was at the local grocery store. He looked thinner, tired, carrying a basket of frozen meals, and looking very much like a man lost in his own story. He approached me hesitantly. "You look different," he said. I smiled. "I feel different," he nodded. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." I looked at him for a long moment. This man, who had once shared my mornings and my dreams, now felt like a distant character from an earlier chapter in my life. One I had closed, but no longer with anger, just with understanding. "I forgive you," I said, "but I don't want you back." He smiled, almost relieved, and walked away. And that was it. No grand reconciliation, no twisted comeback, just closure. A gentle, final punctuation on a sentence that had been left dangling for too long. In time, I grew more rooted in this house. The walls no longer held Judith's voice or Nathan's absence. They echoed with new beginnings. I started hosting small gatherings, book clubs, brunches, workshops for women in the community who had dreams they'd put aside for others, and one day, after a particularly uplifting session, a woman named Rachel pulled me aside. "You're the one who stood up to the Carter family, right?" I nodded. "You inspired me to finally file for my own business license," she whispered. "I figured, if you could take back your house, maybe I could take back my life too." That hit deeper than I expected. Because in all the noise of the past, I hadn't realized that my story might become a blueprint for someone else. I didn't just reclaim a house. I reclaimed my identity, and that's what Judith never understood. It was never about square footage or family legacy. It wasn't about deeds or names. It was about the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and not letting anyone take that away, no matter how loudly they knock on your door. So, now when I sit in my living room, I see more than just furniture and photographs. I see a sanctuary, a place that holds the truth of my journey. And if someone ever tries to claim it again, I'll do more than show them the paperwork. I'll show them the woman who lives here now.